my name is Mary, and today we are going to talk about how to break into venture capital, particularly if you're a student. Now, notably, these series of videos that I'm shooting now about how to get into venture capital or product management or other things that I went through the recruiting process for are secondary to the foundational video I made, which includes information generally about networking, how to break into small and big companies, general strategies, and so I will link that above for you to watch prior to watching this one. But in this video, we're going to talk about the timeline for recruiting, as well as common programs, how to get into VCs that don't even have programs, as well as interview tips, and if I was to do it again, how would I break into venture capital? So if you're interested in that, I hope you are, keep watching. Okay, so to begin with, let's just do a quick overview of venture capital. It'll be super quick. So essentially what VCs do is they invest in startups and hope that they become big companies. And LPs, or limited partners, such as schools, give VCs money to invest in startups, hoping that they become big companies to make returns, which then go back to LPs as well as the people who made those investments. That's what they do. And I would say there are 4 core things that VCs need to be able to do. The first is source companies. So where are they? The second is diligence, so deciding that they're good companies. The third is winning the deal, so having the entrepreneur want you to be on the journey with them, as well as deal terms. And then finally, the operational side of actually helping your founders and being useful. Now, there are all sorts of VCs and they split across various things. So some are very small, some are large and go across various geos, as well as sectors, as well as stages. That is another one of the major ways they split off. So they split off geographically. Some VCs only invest in the US, others only in Europe, others across the globe. And then by stage, generally people split into early stage funds as well as growth stage funds. Sometimes they do, across the board from like pre-seed through pre-IPO. And then often people split by sectors as well. So whether that's crypto or fintech or healthcare or enterprise or consumer, those are all some major sectors that VCs will play some of or all of, or I guess you have to at least one. So that was a quick overview of what venture capital is, and now we're going to go into how you actually get into it. Okay, so talking through the timeline of VC recruiting, I would say as a whole for internships, they recruit in the fall and spring, and for full-time opportunities in your senior year, they will recruit fall and spring. It is after finance and usually on par with tech, but sometimes a little bit later than tech. So one thing to kind of note is VC is it's a pretty scary bet to say that this is the one thing that you want to do and not recruit for other things, because the timeline is later than some of the other major verticals. Now, while you are an undergrad, I think some of the best ways to get involved in startups and in particular venture is to do student-run VCs. And so the most famous, I think the 2 most popular programs for this are Rough Draft Ventures by General Catalyst, as well as Dorm Room Fund. There are also some VCs that hire like lots of scouts that are undergrads or lots of scouts that are students. Romulus Capital is an example of one that I've had friends go to. And then these programs will recruit during the fall usually, and you'll be like a fellow or you'll be part of that program for at least the whole year. There are other programs that are targeted towards students that will get you into the startup ecosystem, and they're awesome, but they're not particularly allowing you the experience of investing themselves. And a couple of those programs would be SBB Track, which runs during the winter break, as well as KP Design and Engineering Fellows, which runs during the summer. So again, in those experiences, you're not actually going to quote unquote like be a VC and be investing in companies actively, but you will be more involved with the startup ecosystem, which is incredibly important if you want to have a job in venture. Now, in terms of internship, and in particular looking at full-time opportunities at big VC firms, it is definitely less common of a route than in software engineering or product management or things like that. But here are the 3 programs that I have heard of. The first is Bessemer. Bessemer has an early stage focus primarily, from what I know, and I'm not sure. I've actually never met anyone who's in their analyst class, but I've definitely seen their application. And I assume that because they are primarily early stage, those analysts would spend a lot of time sourcing, or in other words, you would really learn the skill of finding companies, networking, and finding companies. The second major program is Insight. This is one of the most long established venture analyst programs. Insight primarily focuses on growth stage investing. Their analyst classes from, I think the past few years have been like approximately 30, so it's like some tens of people that you can actually grow up within the industry, which is very cool. And because they are growth stage investors, you will focus both on sourcing as well as diligence. So sourcing is, again, finding the companies, and diligence is, you know, doing financial modeling and reading through their stats and teams and making calls and decisions and recommendations on those companies. And then finally, General Atlantic is even more growth stage. They have a class of analysts. I'm not sure how big that class is, but I do know that those analysts focus on sourcing versus their associates, which are not usually hired from undergrad, focus on diligence. So you would be more focused on one than the other in this program. Okay, so what about all of the VCs who don't have formal internship programs? Now, I just want to clarify that a common misconception is that young people are not in venture capital, or it's not good for them to be in venture capital, especially at top tier firms. I think this was true like 10 or however many years ago, but nowadays, like, I joined an awesome top tier VC firm out of undergrad, and I have lots of friends at other ones who did as well. In fact, of the, I would say, like, top VCs, I have seen friends out of undergrad join like Excel and Andreessen Horowitz and Lightspeed and General Catalyst and, you know, like lots of awesome firms. So it's not impossible as it was maybe like 10, 15 years ago. It's actually becoming more and more common, but you can't find them in a traditional recruiting path as you can with other careers. Okay, so for all of these other VC firms, there are two possibilities. The first is they do have a formal program of some sort that you can join. The second is that they don't, and I'm going to talk about in both cases. So in case they do have a formal internship program or a full-time opportunity program, which by the way is fairly uncommon, the hardest job for you is going to be actually finding it. So here are the three ways that here are the three things I would do to try and figure out if they have a program or not. The first is follow them on LinkedIn, follow their email list, because that is most likely where they're going to be posting about opportunities. The second thing is email your resume to their head of HR or recruiting, or someone at the firm who can send your resume to the head of HR or recruiting, because those are the people who are going to know if there's an internship program and they can keep your resume on file. And then finally, again, in your local community for your local entrepreneurship clubs, or local entrepreneurship community like email lists and stuff, I would definitely sign up for those and read those every single time. Crazy enough, that's actually how I found the firm and the opportunity that I got. If they do not have a formal internship program or a full-time opportunity, which by the way is the majority of these cases, unfortunately, VC is very much about who you know, and it's still a very like opaque recruiting process. And so people will just hear about opportunities for friends, or they will recommend people that they worked with before and things like that. And so you really have to be in the know. So I have a strategy that I'm about to walk you through that essentially is, if I was a student again and I was trying to get into an awesome VC firm out of undergrad, and I wasn't like super well connected already within the venture ecosystem, this is what I would do. Okay, so the strategy that I would advise is to essentially become an expert. So let's say within the 90th percentile of all VCs in some topic, pretty much does not matter what topic so long as it's relevant to some VCs, and send it off to a decision maker. So that's probably MDs or partners at firms. In the best case, they will actually be impressed and be able to hire you. Otherwise, in the second best case, they will send you off as a recommendation to someone that they know that is actually hiring. Now, philosophically, why does this idea work? Well, VCs do for sure come in all shapes and sizes, which is great, but there are various archetypes, and essentially there's only one archetype that students out of undergrad or students generally can fall into, and that is they are hustlers. So they are willing to work super hard, to be super connected, and to find and source and diligence really well. Now, the reason why that is pretty much the only archetype that student VCs can be is because you are not qualified enough to be any of the other archetypes. You don't know a market super well, you don't have a ton of experience, you're not super well connected, and so you actually philosophically kind of have to fall into this bucket. So what do I mean by this? Essentially, I would pick a topic that is somewhat relevant to at least some VCs. You want it to be broad enough, again, that it's somewhat relevant, but narrow enough that you can actually get into the 90th percentile of knowledge, so you can actually be a knowledge expert and you are acknowledged as a knowledge expert in this topic. Now, I have some real world examples from literally people I know who got into venture, great VC firms, out of undergrad in really hard circumstances, as in like they were the first and they didn't have a formal program and all those things. Those two examples are someone who was in the Boston ecosystem and was like #1 at being well connected among student founders in Boston. That was their niche, and that proved their ability as a VC to get them this job. I know someone else who was essentially very well researched, or they had done a lot of research into early stage India companies, and they had written case studies about a variety of India companies, and now they work at a generalist VC firm, but specializing in India. So these are two real world examples. If I was to do it again, I would be like, okay, I'm going to be in the 90th percentile of understanding tokenomics of major crypto companies, and I'm going to post on Twitter about it. Or, hey, I'm going to write blog posts about my analysis of public robotics companies. Or, hey, I'm going to become somewhat of an expert in healthcare companies based in San Diego and tell people about it and become somewhat well known for it. That is probably the best way to break in. I know that's not a shoo-in, and I know that's not, it's a lot of work, but quite frankly, like I think that's the most effective strategy as a student who wants to break into venture nowadays. Okay, so what do you need to study to become a VC? Luckily, you can pretty much study whatever you want. VCs are not super, like they don't use like, at least most of them that I know of don't use like applicant tracking systems that only look for certain majors, which is what a lot of other fields do. With that being said, I would say that people I know who are in venture tend to come from either a finance background, so maybe they studied economics or something like that, or they come from like a tech-related background, so maybe they studied computer science or data science or something like that. In terms of extracurriculars, I would say there are 3 things that you can do. The first is definitely please be involved with entrepreneurship programs and entrepreneurship communities at your school or in your community generally. That is so important because that is most of your job, and if you don't like doing that, then you probably won't like venture. The second thing is having a very specialized skill. So for example, if you happen to be really knowledgeable about cryptography because it's something that interests you, you'd probably be pretty useful to a crypto VC. Or if you know a lot about mechanical engineering, maybe you'd be great for people who focus on hardware and robotics. That is one category of extracurriculars that you can work on if you're interested in this field. The third, I'm going to say with a grain of salt, which is, it happens to be true that a lot of people I know who started companies in undergrad or as a student did end up in VC. With that being said, I want to caution against starting companies for the sake of doing something else. The first thing is starting a company for like a year or two does not teach you, starting a company for a year or two because you want to do something else does not teach you how to be a founder. So wasting VC's monies by starting a company for a year or two for the sake of doing something else also does not put you in good favor with VCs. So I would definitely caution against this path, but I'm also saying that this is like something that I've observed. So when it comes to the interview process, it is definitely not standardized the way it is in software engineering or finance or consulting. Every VC kind of does their own thing. They're technical to various degrees, but here are some general things that I would make sure you do. The first is you need to be able to answer examples of ways in which you have been involved with your local startup system or local entrepreneurship system. If you have examples of how you kept people together, how you bring community, how you find people, that's just like your job as a VC, and so that's very important, especially early stage. The second thing that I would make sure you have an answer to is a list of your, let's say, top 3 to 10 companies, private and possibly public as well, that you think are interesting and why. As in, would you invest in them and why? And the most important part here is having a solid understanding of the framework you're using to evaluate that investment. So for example, are you thinking about the market size? Are you thinking about the management team? Are you thinking about the product? Are you thinking about how it's positioned in the market? Are you thinking about its metrics? Are you thinking about their hiring strategy, like things like that? Some mix of all of that stuff tells the people that are interviewing you how you think about what makes a good company or a good startup, and that's super important. Now, obviously, if you're interviewing with a VC that specializes in a certain category, a certain geography, a certain sector, or a certain stage, I would curate that list for that geography, sector, stage. Finally, if you're applying to a growth stage firm, I would expect that you're going to have to do some amount of financial modeling as part of the interview. Now, from what I've heard, it's significantly less rigorous, I suppose, than if you were to be purely recruiting, investment banking, private equity, things like that. With that being said, I actually do not have a background in that type of finance, and so I can't tell you what type of questions they would ask, but I will get a friend who has done the banking recruiting process for the banking equivalent of this video, and I would just watch that one when it comes out to find a lesser version of what you'll need to do for venture. One last thing. If this recruiting process while you were a student didn't work out, you can still break into a venture from a variety of other times in your life. I would say in the long run, people who are involved in the startup ecosystem, there's somewhat of a revolving door between, I don't know, maybe you were a founder for 10 years and then you decide to become a VC, or you were a founder for a bit and you decide to become a VC like expert in residence, and then you end up becoming a VC and then you go back to being a founder. In other words, like if you're in the startup ecosystem, there's probably a way in. Another short-term path or shorter-term path that you can take to being in venture if you don't go out of undergrad is work, for example, in banking or in consulting for 2 years and then try and join a VC firm. The reason, there are lots of pros and cons to this. I would actually say one of the pros is that VCs are not usually fantastic at training. They're usually a job where you just do stuff. And so these big programs like banking, consulting that have been training people for decades often are actually really good practice for some of the work that you would do in venture. But all of that is just to say that there are other ways in beyond being a student. In fact, it's probably hardest when you are a student. So don't give up if this is something you really want to do. That is all, again, for the foundational video to watch before this one, where I just talk about recruiting generally. Go watch that video. For future videos where I'm going to talk about other sectors such as product management, consulting, software engineering, subscribe. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below.